and welcome. My name is Janice B. Gordon, and this is Scale Your Sales Podcast, listed number 9 of 43 best podcasts for every sales professional. I am Janice B. Gordon, the customer growth expert, recommended by LinkedIn Sales as one of 15 innovating sales influencers to follow. In today's episode of Scale Your Sales Podcast, my guest talks about the difference between formative versus programmatic EDI strategies and explains why you've got to do more than walk the walk. You've got to talk the talk and how that happens at different levels in the organization. We also talked about AI and how to humanize that. And the enablement space, what are the challenges with that, and what are the real kind of benefits if you put the dollars in the right places? What's the benefits to the organization? What's exciting about it? But the whole thing was wrapped up in the future of sales, how we can't rely on what we used to do in the processes and the people and the teams. We've really got to look forward to what sales and buying groups are going to look like in the future. It's an incredible discussion about leadership, about SDRs, about operations. You're going to love it. My next guest went from refugee to revenue leader. Her career spans engineering, marketing, and sales, earning her the nickname Black Ops. A multinational keynote speaker on sales, leadership, and a passionate advocate of women in the workplace. She is author of Wall Street Journal best-selling book, Embrace Your Edge, for underrepresented groups in the workplace. Welcome to Scale Your Sales Podcast, Han Black.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here.
Han, it's an absolute pleasure. Now, we're in various groups together, and I always love talking to you. And I really want to start with where we are at the moment. Hey, one of the conversations that we've been talking about is the amount of women that are not always by their own choice leaving sales, but also the fact that, you've mentioned before AI and how that's changing sales. But then we're in a challenging environment as well. I mean, it's like there is nothing that's standing still. And so the danger is all we do is revert back to type. When things do normalize, whatever normal is, we just revert back and go back to the old way of doing things, because that's the way we feel comfortable and secure. What's your thoughts about really the future of sales and how we can work in a different environment that's good for all?
Well, as you and I have talked about in our different circles, sales and buying has changed so much since the times of Challenger. Challenger was very disruptive and innovative at the time, and I think we are in another evolutionary step function. We are in a post-COVID, very virtual, hybrid environment. We are in a situation where we've got more Gen Z coming in, boomers retiring out. We've got the presence of social media and, of course, the advent of AI. I find that in times of economic strife, people do revert back to what they know, and especially to previous bad behaviors. So my concern is this: if we are not planning for the future, we are already behind the present. And what I mean by that is I am seeing a lot of trends where there are women exiting the sales force because of cultural disparities in how they are treated. I'm seeing increasing attempts to increase revenue by hiring more SDRs or hiring more feet on the street versus actually investing in leadership development, investing in how we use AI differently so that we can use our talent differently. So the SDR function may still exist, but in a lesser way from a one-to-one perspective than it is about how do we manage the AI tools to maximize using applications to act more like humans until humans are ready to interact with humans. So again, just really meeting the customer where they are, because they are a lot more digitally savvy.
Okay, there's so much to get in here. So we've got the future of sales from different perspectives. One is from our customers, our buyers are changing. Two is, and I have to number these so that I remember, all the things we're going to cover. Two is AI and how we can humanize that, and how that's changing the way that we sell, and how that becomes part of the process. And three is in terms of the workforce, the feet on the ground, and the fact that actually everything is having to shrink because technology and so forth. So those are the kind of three areas that I've heard kind of come out of, and of course leadership as well, the ever-present problem of leadership development, right? So I read a research from AMANY that in the buying groups, the purchasing groups, that the majority of buyers now below the age of 30, particularly, this is B2B buying, particularly 25. And the majority of current buyers that in the B2B purchase 100,000 plus are men. And so within 5 to 10 years, that's going to swap over, in that 75% of the buyers, B2B buyers, will be that 25, 30-year-olds that have grown up and stayed in the industry. They will be the ones that are doing the majority of the buyers. So, and I thought that was great for thinking, really, my thoughts everything's dropping off. Really to get us to think about what does the workforce currently look like and needs to look like going forward? Because if your sales force isn't reflecting your buyers, then you're at a disadvantage. You're not going to have any kind of competitive edge at all. So having kind of been aware of that stat, what's your thoughts in terms of what the diverse makeup of the sales force looks like for the future of sales, and how we can start to change that?
I'm always astonished by, when I talk to students, the diverse makeup of students, and then as they go into career, what the diverse talent pool looks like in early career. The issue has been for many, many years and decades has been what's called the missing rung, right? It's kind of that half step into your first management job, your first leadership job. There's another missing rung when you go into executive leadership. I think what will be really interesting is, because of social media, we're going to see a lot more social pressures to the CEO staff, to the board members, where we can look up all that information. Who is at the top? So a lot of times people look at diversity at the bottom of the talent pool. I think that the bottom of the talent pool, as they move up, are going to actually provide pressure upwards, so that we are starting to be diverse at the top levels too. I mean, moving from company to company, the number of customers, partners, talent that follow me just because I'm diverse, it's really such an honor. And, I don't think I'm exceptionally spectacular. It's just there's not enough of us. So generally, when I take over a team, for instance, it's maybe 30% diverse. By the time I leave a team, it's over 60% diverse. And in fact, I then have to start being careful to make sure that I have enough white men to represent my buyers out there. So diversity comes in all flavors. I think we really, really are going to be dependent on this next generation to help kind of fix the disparities and demand a level set. Because I know when I buy, I definitely say the same things to the vendors. I looked at your board, I looked at your CSAP, I look at who's talking to me, and it's very, very important so that it reflects my values.
Yeah.
And don't try to take me to a golf course, just not interested. But I'm happy to have a spa day.
That reminds me when I was in sales in the 1990s, and all of the so it was 4 women and 20 men, and that was quite high in that time in financial services. And all of the rewards were rugby days and football tickets and all of that. So what we did is the women, if one or two of us won an award, we would ask the company to take all of us to, top restaurant for dinner and something like that. But this isn't the 1990s, Han, right? And now it's exactly the same. When they think of rewards, it's, it hasn't really changed at all. We're just not adapting at all. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of workforces. And if you have a sales leader, a female sales leader, they will naturally attract, see it, believe it, a diverse workforce. And although it's not the easiest thing to get a woman sales leader, the best thing you can do is get a woman sales leader, because then that's going to, as you continue to do in all of the companies, change the makeup of the team, and that's going to help the organization.
And it cross-pollinates. And let me be clear, I don't think that any of these things are intentional. The problem is this: if we're not intentional about inclusion, we might have unintended consequences about exclusion. And what I mean by that is, as I mentioned, for my teams personally, they end up more diverse just because I was there. But here's the great benefit: all the teams around me start getting more diverse too, because I have a lens for it. And because I'm part of the CRO staff, I get to influence those decision makings. I get to influence who's on the interview panel, who's on the candidate list. Is it fair? In general, and again, you and I have shared this topic before. In general, if you only have one person on a slate that's diverse, the likelihood of them getting hired is very, very slim, because they look like an oddball. And if everyone on the other side of the interview table doesn't look like them, they're going to have confirmation bias and unconscious bias around certain skill sets that they're looking for. Now, when you have just 2 people on the short list, it maximizes and increases the probability of a diverse hire by 79 times. And again, I'm talking gender, ethnicity, age, all the different types of diversity that we can have, including tenure. I love to see people inside a company moving from one area to another and being considered for it very fairly in meritocracy, rather than they weren't a good fit for this group, but they're one of my favorites, so let me just move them. If we do all these things in a meritocratic way, with more balance on who we're bringing to the table on either side, we will end up representing our buyers on the sales side and the success side as well.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about AI and humanizing AI with regards to the future of sales. So talk to me more about your thoughts here.
Well, the tool stack is one of my favorite parts of my job, but also one of the nemesis of my jobs, because it seems like the tool stack keeps expanding because everyone has a very specific niche that they play in. And eventually what was a company becomes a feature in another company, and then we start getting consolidation, things start looking healthier, etc. Now, the benefit of AI, actually, I'll start with the difficulty of AI. Junk in, junk out. Right? So we need to make sure that we're balancing the inputs that we're putting into the AI machinery to begin with. Does it, again, represent all the buyers in our population out there in language, tonality, The second thing is, how are we using AI to optimize for this tool consolidation? How do we use it smartly instead of having an outreach and a sales loft feeding our SDRs? Maybe we have our SDRs, a smaller subset of them, writing language around more in-depth sequences that are reflecting our ICPs in certain verticals. So that's how I think of the opportunity that we have moving forward.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so another aspect you brought up so many excellent points was in terms of the economy and when or if that normalizes and us just reverting back to type, our old ways, the things that are comfortable for us to do. And in terms of the future of sales, that's going to be pretty dangerous because our buyers and customers are kind of moving forward and we're not really adapting to that. So talk to me more about how we can overcome this and what we need to do.
Well, not only do our feet on the street need to be more digitally savvy, so do our leaders. And that means that leadership principles have to change. I used to do what I call SDR for a day. Haven't done it this year, but I would do it one day a year so that I can actually sit in the seat of an SDR. I do it for my AMs, I do it for my AEs, and I kind of look at what does a day in their life look like. And really, when I say a day, I'm doing it for 2 hours. But and I recommend it so highly to sales and success leaders. And oftentimes they'll say, "Oh, I remember being on the phones. I remember being that CSM. I remember dialing for dollars." But here's the thing: a lot of us in leadership remember it from the last century when we were in our 20s. We don't have the operational skill set to have to navigate 5 or 6 tools that have 20 different tabs open. You've got multiple monitors that you've got to look at. Oh, and by the way, you have to remember what your product value is and the scripting behind that. So I would actually challenge that a lot of our opportunity here is to make sure that we're hiring and refreshing our leadership to lead and coach in a way that is relevant. We see it time and time again in all of our Gartner reports, Forrester reports, and then even when we do stakeholder analyses. I'm sure Lori Richardson can talk about the toolkit that she uses with you to talk about what skill sets are being measured for. Because most of the time, what happens? Where do our leaders come from? We promote people who sell best. Then those people come in, and without any support, what do? They end up supporting deals, especially at the close that we're going to close anyway, or they start micromanaging their people, whereas they should be spending time coaching them on how to prospect and how to progress a deal.
Absolutely. And I know I use the same tool as Lori Richardson, so I know exactly what you mean. What in the industry, reverting back to type, is you get a salesperson that has continue to beat their targets. They get promoted to be a sales manager or a sales leader with no sales skills in leadership or management and very little training. And then, as we know, that doesn't always end well, but it takes a long time for them to move on, and they certainly don't go backwards. So there's a lot broken in the leadership and the management of sales teams, and unfortunately, and that doesn't seem to be improving.
Yeah, but here's another benefit though. With the advent of ChatGPT, a lot of the leadership can actually keep themselves abreast of all the technological changes out there. We've got LinkedIn Learning. We've got things in places where we can self-source. I use ChatGPT easily 3 times a week. I go to my sales teams and I go to universities to understand what are the trends that are coming that we haven't seen. And I am starting to see us fall farther and farther behind because we are listening less to those innovative voices, because we are reverting to what's known and the people who have been in authority, in positions of authority. Now, the great thing is that's a competitive advantage for CROs out there and CEOs out there. Hey, let me go listen to others, and the quicker I can obtain outside influence and trends, then the quicker I can adapt to what's going to happen in the future. One of my favorite people to follow is Professor G, also known as Scott Galloway. He's a futurist, and I just I follow his predictions every year.
Yeah, yeah. So another area I wanted to talk to you about is in terms of the way the sales force is changing and SDRs. You mentioned about, what reverting back to type is just putting more feet on the ground, hiring more SDRs, and that really isn't embracing the amount of changes that are happening in the industry and how we need to adapt to it. You can't just add more to it, really.
That's
You've
right.
got to, adapt and change. So what are your thoughts around that?
So don't get me wrong. I believe that the SDR job is still there. It's just got to change, especially the outbound SDRs. Inbound SDRs, they're responding to already a warm request. But what's going to change, I believe, with SDRs and AEs, those who are highly prospecting, is how do they use AI as a starting point, or tools with AI as a starting point? Because we talk about the humanization of the digital world. We've all become a lot more distant. There's a lot more remote presence, remote meetings. You and I are talking from 7 different time zones away, but how do we retain that humanity? I think what's happening right now is there's a huge lack of understanding around using AI as the starting point, as a first draft. There's still a lot of room for us to humanize it. We start there, and then we put our own voice on top.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I've got a question about the difference between performative and programmatic EDI strategies. Difficult enough to say, but I know you're going to clarify that for us, Han.
Absolutely. There have been questions about, is DEI dead, right? And the whatever order of the letters we use: D is diversity, E is equity, I is inclusion. And right now there's a lot of focus on the I inclusion part. But guess what? If we don't focus on the D and the E, we don't get the inclusion piece. So when we talk about performative versus programmatic, I think of those aspects in terms of recruiting, retaining, and elevating our talent, no matter who and what they look like and where they come from. So on the recruitment side, are we putting in programmatic things to make sure that we're embracing all of the talent pool? Where are we going? Are we only going to the Ivy Leagues? Are we only going into our networks and our friends of friends, right? Friends of the founder, so to speak. Or are we going to overlooked universities? Are we going to, in the US, HBC colleges? Are we going into our vet pools or our return to work pools from our parents who have spent some time raising their children and coming back? Are we looking at all the different corners? Now, that being said, that's on the recruitment side. On the retention side, are we giving them role models who look like them at the top? Because the performative piece is telling everyone about how much you care and not actually practicing it. Are you hiring that workforce in a programmatic way? And then are you retaining them in a programmatic way by making sure that there are processes that help remove unconscious bias and confirmation bias? Did you know if you have less than 10% of a certain population in a workforce, they perform less because they don't feel that inclusion. They don't have that psychological safety. And we go back to leadership. How refreshing is it in a Gen Z population? They very much welcome when your team one-on-ones are not just about, did you hit your number this week? Did you hit your number this month? But to actually have a dedicated team session around psychological safety for yourself as a team, but also as your customer, right? How do we talk to our customers so that they have psychological safety? And so, part of the retention side, equal pay, equal pay, equal pay, equal pay. Here's the other part that's missing: equal access. That's on the elevating side. Equal access to help elevate so that our top looks more like the diversity that we have at the entry level. Because we keep building this pyramid, this triangle, and people leave not because the job is difficult to balance work and family. It's because the politics inside the company are difficult. So how do we remove those systemic barriers to make sure that we start growing a very healthy pipeline? And we're in sales. We all love healthy pipelines, right?
Yeah, exactly. We are. And I just, companies have talked about this, but they're not actually doing it. What needs to change? What needs to change to move from the tick box process? Because, to be frank, look at this color. I like lots of people where during the pandemic and we had all of the different campaigns come out, and I won't mention, there was quite a few. I had a little bit of hope. I had some hope there would be change, and so much of that has been dashed. So there are lots of processes and lots of great things out there, but really, Han, is it going to change? Do you still have hope, or is it just me that's losing it?
Well, one of my favorite quotes as of recent has been, Janice, when is the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago.
Mm.
When is the second best time to plant a tree?
Now.
Today, right? So yes, I am one of those people who, for good or bad, for better or worse, I am always overly optimistic about the change that we can make if we start in ourselves. And that starts with A, do I recognize my own unconscious bias? Do I acknowledge it and take ownership of it and accountability into what am I going to personally do about mine? Because I can't talk to someone else about their unconscious bias until I address mine. Secondly, as we talked about, it's about programs, not performative language. I've had leaders insert pronouns every third opportunity they get, and yet they're still hiring people who look like them. Yeah. They're still suppressing the voices of people who don't look like them. So how do we make policies and programs to ensure that those voices are heard and those faces are seen? So one of the things I like to do is make sure that I am building programs where people who are very talented but who have been overlooked have a chance to be accelerated. Because a lot of times when we look at promotions, we look at time in seat. And I would challenge people to look at time in seat plus time overlooked. Mm. Okay. I went from an IC senior manager to vice president in 3 years of a Fortune 500 company. But that's only because I had been overlooked for 10 years. Now, that's my personal experience. So what I started doing was building programs to identify people who were similar, who had been overlooked for a long time. And what I did was I gave them an executive sponsor, not a mentor, but an executive sponsor, someone, and generally outside of their direct line of leadership, because that person will help remove doors for them when they are not in the room. We'll give them frank but constructive feedback. And that's why I talk about sponsorship versus mentorship, because oftentimes we mistake mentorship for fixing the women or fixing whoever is marginalized, when what really needs to happen is to help them be seen and recognized for their work. Because it's not just what you know or who you know, it's who knows what you know, and how do you expand that exposure surface. So with that small group of people, once I've identified them, I give them a big gnarly project that's going to take them a year to complete. And they have an opportunity to present to some level of executive staff. And I'm very proud to say that whenever I produce those programs, those people get elevated, promoted within a year. And now we start looking more like we have more role models at the top.
Yeah.
That's how we get to be programmatic versus just saying on LinkedIn, I have a daughter and therefore I care.
Yeah.
It's what do we actually do inside to provide equitable pay and equitable access.
Love this. Love this. All right. I know I'm jumping around because there's so much that I want to cover with you. And so the last thing I want to talk about is sales enablement and the way that's changing and how it is going to enable or support the future of sales. What is changing in sales enablement? What are you excited about and you want to be moving forward with?
Yeah, I think the very good thing about enablement was pre-pandemic or leading up to the pandemic, we had a very strong seat at the table. A lot of us moving to report directly to the CRO. And I say CRO because that's really important. We're covering now not just sales, but post sales on the customer success side. So it's a true end-to-end revenue cycle. So when we look at the buyer's journey, we no longer look at it from a linear perspective, but we're looking at it at in what a previous colleague of mine had called an infinity loop. When do you onboard a customer? When do you upsell a customer? When do you offboard a customer and hopefully bring them back if it's challenged? So that's the positive side. Because of the difficult economic environment, I am seeing that support groups, whether it's enablement, operations, tools, they're getting starved for dollars for more feet on the street. More feet on the street that we are not supporting with better enablement, leadership investment to get all of our leaders up to being digitally savvy and empathetic. That maps to especially our younger staff of Gen Z and millennials. Millennials are now becoming more of our decision makers, but they themselves are transforming the workforce, and we're just not addressing that. So that's what's alarming, but also the opportunity. If we can focus on having a better balance in our investments and having that seat at the table where they're just not an execution engine, but actually the heartbeat of the culture for the organization to help look around corners, that's where it's really exciting.
Which is excellent. I'm happy that you're really excited about those changes and kind of leading those change. So how can listeners get hold of you, Han?
Well, that's quite easy. You can hit me up on LinkedIn. And if you want to find out a little bit more about me before hitting me up on LinkedIn, just go to www.hangwithhang.com. You can read about what I've done, what I stand for, and my passion to elevate others, whether it's professionally or personally.
And I would say you will have a wonderful experience if you read Han's book as well. It's absolutely a joy to read. It's such an incredible journey and story in Embrace Your Edge. I've really enjoyed it, and I've read it several times now, but it's such a good read. So thank you so much for being a guest on Scale Your Sales podcast, Han Black.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Scale Your Sales podcast. If you like this discussion, feel free to listen to other episodes or watch the captioned show on YouTube and subscribe to future episodes. I would really appreciate it if you would leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you.